It's interesting because the process of buying a home in Mexico is very much like it is in the United States. A lot of people have the misconception that it's very different and very foreign, but honestly, it's not, at least not in San Miguel de Allende.
Hello, viewers. Welcome back to another video. I am Maya, your interview host for Berkshire Hathaway Home Services here in San Miguel de Allende in central Mexico. Today, we are interviewing Greg Gunter. He's the broker and co-owner, along with his business partner, Alma, of the sole Berkshire Hathaway Home Services office in San Miguel. Welcome back, Greg.
Hey, Maya, good morning. How are you? It's a gorgeous day today. I'm anxious to do today's video.
It is. I'm actually really excited about today's topic, which is navigating through legalities. It's a sort of guide to purchasing property in San Miguel de Allende. I'm sure it'll be incredibly informative. We have a lot to unpack today. I hope you can stick with us throughout the whole video. We'll talk about so many things, the role of a notary public, understanding Mexican law, the purchase agreement, the concept of due diligence, closing the deal, and the before and after, of course, of purchasing a home, maybe the challenges buyers can face when doing this in Mexico. And we'll also address some common misconceptions about buying property in Mexico. For example, the misconception that Americans can't own property in Mexico and things like that. So, Greg, perhaps you can address the basics of Mexican law to start regarding property ownership, particularly for foreigners.
Sure, lots to cover today, team. I hope you can stick with us. So this is part of that misconception, and we wanted to clarify. That's one of the first things to kind of get out of the way. In San Miguel de Allende, we are in central Mexico. Hopefully you already know that, those of you that are interested in San Miguel specifically. So we're not in what's called the protected zone. The protected zone in Mexico is anything along the coast or the border that borders the United States. In the protected zone, you cannot own property. You're correct. In those areas in the coast, like in Cabo San Lucas and Puerto Vallarta and Cancun and Merida and those kinds of areas, you don't actually own the property outright. You have it through a bank trust. We're actually going to talk about that in just a bit. But here in San Miguel de Allende, you own fee simple, just like in the United States. So you have a deed with your name on it. No one can take it away from you. It's fully and completely in your name. The deed is in your name. So very much like, well, exactly like the United States, it's the same kind of ownership process. Yeah, very easy.
Yeah, and well, you mentioned the concept of Fideicomiso, and this is trust in English. It is a requirement for foreigners who are buying property in restricted zones. So how does San Miguel differ regarding the Fideicomiso? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as I kind of mentioned, we're in central Mexico, so we're not in that protected zone, you know, what they call a protected zone. So you own fee simple here. The Fideicomiso is still fine. I mean, it's something that's good for 99 years. Your children can inherit it. You can buy and sell the property. It's a similar type of ownership, but it technically is a bank trust. It is a third party that kind of holds the property. So the difference here is that there is no Fideicomiso process. You literally have the deed. That is something that's a little reassuring for many of my clients that come to San Miguel, because they know that they can have a deed with their name literally on the deed. So no worries there. If the government might change or something might change with the a new Mexican president or something, does not affect your ownership whatsoever in San Miguel.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And well, as you said, the whole process is very similar to the process of purchasing a home in the United States. What's not so similar is the role of a notary public. They're very different. So Greg, maybe you can explain what the role of a notary public in Mexico is.
Yes, of course. That's always an interesting thing for people that have not been to Mexico before. You use the word notary public. Notario is the word here in Spanish in Mexico, notario. And they go, oh, like a public notary in the US? And I'm like, no, very different. We all know, all of us Americans, of course, know that a public notary, every secretary in the United States is a public notary, is a second job or a title that they have. Here, a notario is a registered Mexican real estate attorney. He gets designated as a notario as a federal position. So it's a lifetime position, just like being a judge. It's something that's good forever for the rest of his lifetime, and in many cases, the children, his son will inherit that position and be able to continue that role. But they have to be certified by the federal government, and they have to have already been a licensed real estate attorney. And then they have to do continuing education to maintain that role. So, talking about their importance in the real estate process, I mean, they must be involved with any real estate transaction. It's not an option. They are just like the closing company and the title company rolled into one position. So very critical. There are many notarios in every city, and so the notario you work with is also very important. So it's extremely important to work with a well-known realtor, a realtor that has a lot of experience and works with the best notary in town, because different notaries can interpret the Mexican law in different ways. They have a little bit of leeway in how they interpret the Mexican law. So it's good to work with a realtor that knows the best notario in town. I think we'll talk in just a bit about how they work with the paperwork.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted you to share with our listeners the documents that the notario verifies and how the notario can assist with legal paperwork during the whole process.
Sure. So as I mentioned, the notario here is like the closing company and the title company rolled into one. So of course, that's the biggest role that he has is, taking a look at the title. One of the very first things that you'll get when you're working with one of our realtors is the no lien certificate. So the first thing our legal team will do, any legal team will do, is make sure that there's no liens against the property. Remember, not many properties down here have any kind of a mortgage against them. That would normally be considered a lien. And if that does come up, of course, we'll notify the buyer immediately that there is at least a mortgage that needs to be paid off. But that's one of the very first things the notario does, is verifies that there's no liens. Another thing that they do very quickly is that they'll file a document in the courthouse, in the legal system, that says this property is now under contract and will be closing. And that prevents any seller or any vendor that might work with the seller from then posting a lien against the property after the property's already gone under contract. So there's a number of those kinds of legal documents that your realtor and the legal team and the notario, all working together as a big team, will be filing all the paperwork there on your behalf, as the buyer. They will continue then to move forward on getting your SRE permits. That's a permit to own property as a foreigner in Mexico. They will work with you on any other legal documentation. The notario and the legal team will work with you on any other legal documentation, like perhaps a power of attorney. In Mexico, it's called a poder in Spanish. That power of attorney, I will typically name one of the attorneys on the legal team that's working with the notario as the power of attorney. They can then sign legal documents that usually require a wet signature. For instance, like the SRE permit, that requires a wet signature. The final closing requires an actual physical person. The buyer must be present at the closing or their power of attorney. So in many cases, if my buyers can't physically attend the closing, they can't come down for another month or a couple of months sometimes, then we will name one of the legal team to become their power of attorney, and they can sign for the buyer at the closing so that the buyer doesn't physically have to be there. Anyway, all of that falls under the umbrella of the notario. So that notario role is critically important to the entire process. Yeah, a big role.
Yes, very, very important. And what about the actual purchase agreement, Greg? Let's learn more about the importance of a purchase agreement and what it should include now that we're talking about documents, right?
Certainly, of course. Now, an original offer, offer to purchase is very much like it is in the United States. In fact, we're an American franchise, and so we work with boilerplate language that's coming from the United States that's just been modified to reflect Mexican law. But again, it's based on American boilerplate. So it's going to be language that you're very familiar with. A purchase agreement, you're going to want to be aware of certain things, though, that might vary a little bit down here. So things like, is the furniture included or not? Is there any kind of artwork included? What kind of appliances might be included? Those types of things. The period of closing is different, obviously, than it is in the United States as well. It tends to be a little shorter here. So you'll always want to have a closing date that's put in there. Typically, it's about 30 days in Mexico, normally because there's not a loan. I've been a realtor here for 12 years, and I've only done 2 deals of several hundred homes that I've closed. I've only done 2 deals with loans on them. So loans are very rare here. Loans will typically slow down the process if you do need a mortgage in Mexico. But, again, 99.8% of our clients don't use a loan. So it's typically a 30-day closing process. That will be named when you're working with one of us or our realtors on our team. We will always name the legal team that will work and the notarial that you'll be working with that represents you. That's very important to put that into the purchase agreement as well. Okay. Now, one of the interesting things about our purchase agreement here is it's just based on initial street address. After we get dual signatures on that purchase agreement, we then go to what's called a promesa de compraventa in Spanish. And that's just a more formalized version of that offer to purchase. But in that promesa de compraventa, we put the legal metes and bounds of the property. This is an interesting point about Mexico. I used to live at a street address that there were 2 of them in the city. So a lot of my friends that would come, or I actually had a rental back at the time, and people would try to show up at my rental address, and in fact they'd show up at the wrong address that was a block down. So the reason the promesa de compraventa has that metes and bounds legal description that comes from the deed from the seller is to make sure that you're getting the right property. Sometimes there's 2 property addresses that might be duplicated. So that promesa de compraventa will also include things like the legal documentation for the owners, the sellers and the buyers as well, passport numbers, full legal names, things like that. So it's kind of a 2-part process: the original offer to purchase, which is bilingual, by the way, and then the promesa de compraventa, which is also bilingual but has more legal information.
Yeah, and I'm sure there is like a whole process of negotiation and agreeing on terms. So why don't you walk us through this process?
Sure, it's very much like in the United States again, where here's the big difference though, listeners. A lot of my buyers, especially that are coming from the coast, they'll say, "Well, no, where I come from, there's the asking price, and then you have to bid above that. Does it work that way in San Miguel?" I'm like, "Oh no, it's just the opposite in San Miguel. We have an asking price, and then of course you're typically negotiating down from that." Even during the height of post-COVID, the market was really hot. We only had above asking price negotiations on probably 3 or 4 deals throughout the entire city. It's very rare that you get into a bidding war where you have to bid above asking price. So you're negotiating back and forth on the not only on the price, but sometimes on the length of the closing period. In some cases, the buyer might be anxious to get moved in right away and they want a 30-day closing, but the seller goes, "Oh gosh, I've been living here for 20 years. I need more time to pack and get moved out. I want a 90-day close." So we'll be going back and forth on a couple of things: furniture, what might be included in the furniture. Perhaps there's some art pieces that you like that you might want to add as negotiate a price on an art piece that's different or above and beyond the price of the home. So those are the kinds of things that typically get negotiated, and you'll go back and forth 2, maybe 3 times on that. Typically, we'll have that all ironed out, and we'll get dual signatures, though, by at least about the 3rd offer. So very similar to the United States, just a few more things that are included, like, furniture, art, those sorts of things that might vary a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So it's making sure both parties are happy with the deal, protected.
Exactly.
And yeah, so thank you for answering that. Why don't we chat a bit about due diligence? Can you explain the concept of due diligence and why it's crucial when buying property in Mexico?
Yeah, due diligence is a really difficult process in Mexico. In the United States, you can go down to the county clerk and recorder's office and look up all the old data on the property, how much it's sold for, or in the MLS, for instance. In Zillow and all those others, you'll find the history of the property, how many times it's sold, what it's sold for, all of that. Excuse me. None of that is available in Mexico, unfortunately. We have no county clerk and recorder's office. I mean, we do, but it's not open to the public. So only the notarial has access to those numbers. So when you're doing what we would call due diligence, in other words, kind of trying to find out the history of a property, and is it accurately priced? Is it priced to market? How long has it been on the market? it's critical to work with a realtor that has a vast experience in the local market. For instance, I've been doing real estate here for 12 years. Much of my team has been doing real estate for many years here as well. So they'll often know the history of that particular property, you know, what it was priced for earlier. We don't really have an MLS that tracks those kinds of statistics. So it's critical to work with a realtor that has that kind of experience and can tell you a little bit more about the due diligence. So that's the key takeaway, I think, from this point, is that there is no traditional due diligence like you have in the United States. It really comes down to the relationship with your realtor. And that's why it's critical to work with a licensed realtor that has a long-term history in our local San Miguel de Allende market.
Yes, of course. And what checks should be performed, including the title search, checking for liens, and ensuring there are no outstanding debts on the property?
Yes, of course. Well, that's a little bit like we talked about a little earlier, that the notario will double check those. Now, you know, some realtors are not very active about transferring that information from the notario or making sure the notario does that in a timely manner. When we work with when Berkshire Hathaway realtor team works with you, we make sure that you're finding out within the first 24 hours if there's any liens on that property. So again, working with a really experienced realtor, you're going to make sure that you hear back that the title search comes back clean, there's no liens on the property, it's free and clear of any kind of encumbrances whatsoever, that there's free, a free title that can be transferred to you, and that there's no outstanding debts. Again, the notario does all of that, but it's up to the realtor to make sure that we're relaying that information back to you and making sure that it's happening in a timely manner. Because I've been with other deals where, you know, you don't find out that there's a free and clear title until you're 3 weeks into the process and you're almost ready to close. We want to make sure that you know that within the first 24 hours.
Yeah, of course. It seems like the biggest takeaway of this video is buyers should work with an experienced realtor, right?
Yes. Oh, and Maya, let me interject this too. One more piece of due diligence that people may not be aware of. We do property inspections in Mexico just like you do in the United States.
Right.
So I work with a whole host of property inspectors. There's about 4 or 5 that are on my must-call list, and I'll work with the one that can get in there the quickest. But of course, we definitely do property inspections here. So that's another part of the due diligence process that you'll go through here. In fact, you'll do a property inspection and negotiate any terms that might need to be negotiated that are, you know, something that might affect the habitability of the house and be a danger issue. You'll negotiate that with the seller, come to terms on that, and then finally remove your inspection contingency before you even put any money into escrow. So that's an important point to know as well when it comes to due diligence, is doing that property inspection and make sure you're getting a good property before you even put any kind of money whatsoever into the escrow account.
Very important. Yes. So after
Yes.
the inspection, after everything, like the price has been agreed upon, we go to the heart of it, which would be closing the deal. So share with us the process of closing the deal, including the transfer of funds and the signing of deeds.
Sure. So I just talked about how you're waiting until you have removed your inspection contingency. On our contracts, that's typically 10 business days. So you don't even have any money that goes into escrow until 2 weeks. 10 business days is 2 weeks after you've got a dual signed offer from the buyer and the seller. We use escrow down here in Mexico, or at least in San Miguel de Allende. There are other parts of Mexico that are not quite as diligent about using escrow, but in San Miguel de Allende, of course, we're very based on the North American style of doing real estate transactions, and so we definitely use escrow here. All the large firms here will use escrow. Now, Berkshire Hathaway Home Services is a bit unique from the standpoint that we use an escrow company that is licensed, insured, and bonded. Not many, in fact, none of the other escrow companies in Mexico are insured and bonded like they are in the United States. That's a bit of a rarity. Keep in mind that Berkshire Hathaway works with a company that's only insured and bonded. They're the only ones in Mexico. So that's important. You're putting your money into an escrow account that's insured, which means it's safe. The funds will sit there for a couple of weeks. Now, remember, I talked that typically a closing is 30 days. So from the date you get dual signatures on an offer contract until your closing is about 30 days. Well, it's 2 weeks until you put the first 10%. Typically, our escrow money, our earnest money deposit is 10% of the purchase price. That's another kind of a difference between the American market. You'll put that 10% earnest money in 2 weeks. And then about 2 weeks later, that's about the end of the 30-day closing period, is when you're submitting the last 90% of that balance of the purchase price. And then also your closing cost. You can send your closing cost to escrow also. And then those get distributed to all the different entities that are involved in the transaction. The different real estate agencies, the notario. Here we have a 4% acquisition tax that has to be collected by the notario by law. And of course, that has to go into a separate account. It can't be commingled with the rest of his funds. So the escrow will handle all of those closing costs, the city fees, the notarial fees, all of that will be handled through escrow. So that goes to about 8 different entities, the seller being one, the different real estate companies, the notarial, and the different accounts the notarial has. So all of that will get distributed at closing. We sign the deed in the notarial's office. And when that signature has been witnessed by the notarial, he then authorizes the escrow company to release the funds. So the seller's getting their money. If we close before noon of that day, typically the funds can be transferred that same day. But that's not always the case. In many cases, some of the closings may not be completed until a little after 12 o'clock in the day. And so the funds will not get distributed until the next business day. So that's kind of how the funds get transferred and the deed gets signed in front of the notarial.
Great. Thank you for explaining the role of escrow services in ensuring a secure transaction. I'm sure our viewers would be very, very relieved to hear that we use these escrow services and that their money is protected throughout the process.
Exactly. No one can touch the funds. In other words, when you're putting money in, and this is an important point to note, listeners, but it's just like in the United States. Once you put that money into escrow, of course, it's non-refundable. So that's why we don't put money into escrow down here until you've determined that you're getting a safe and home and that you've negotiated any kind of inspection terms. Because once it gets into the escrow, which is signed by both the buyer and the seller, those are non-refundable funds. So the buyer can't back out and get his money back. He has to move forward or lose that 10% earnest money in there. That's the good thing about having escrow, is that it ensures both parties are protected. Here in San Miguel, the escrow fee is about a $400 fee for the company that we use, the one that's insured and bonded. That's split just like in the United States. Remember, if it's a service that's of benefit to both the buyer and the seller, then that fee is split between the two parties. So it's a $200 fee to the buyer and a $200 fee to the seller because they both participate in that escrow. But yeah, escrow down here works very much like in the United States.
That's great. And what about after the purchase of your new home in San Miguel, after both parties had agreed and everything is ready to go, money is on escrow, what happens next?
Well, money has been released from escrow, of course. Then after you have released the money from escrow and you've got your new deed, you sign the deed, you put wet signatures on the deed in the notarial's office. He then takes that folio numbered or property or document to the city, and it has to get registered at the city. They will put a holographic stamp on it and all their official city documents and things like that. That process takes 4 to 6 weeks. And then that very official holograph stamped deed will get sent back to the legal team from the notarial's office, and the new buyer, in other words, is able to pick up a copy of that. Now, the Mexican government kind of thinks of that almost like money. So, they won't release that until you come down and pick it up personally from the notarial or the legal team's office. And you want to put it into a safe deposit box into a safe, in the house to keep it. But it's a pretty simple process. It's just, 4 to 6 weeks afterwards. If you haven't seen a deed coming back to you, if your realtor hasn't notified you that it's ready and recorded and ready for you to pick up, you need to pick up the phone and call the realtor. But, when you work with Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, we're tracking that process for you and making sure that you get notified as soon as it's ready for you to pick up.
That's great. And after registering the property and getting your final deed, what are some of the ongoing responsibilities, like, I don't know, property taxes, maintenance fees that buyers should know about?
Sure. Let's back up a little bit and say that I always recommend to my buyers that they engage a property manager. So even if you don't plan to rent the property, it's always good to have a bilingual property manager that can kind of maintain the property for you. The good thing about that, of course, is that, you know, if you have a pipe burst at 3 in the morning, you can call the bilingual property manager who will actually answer the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? And you can explain the problem to them in English, and they then immediately call the plumber, and in Spanish, they can explain. And the plumber actually answers the phone at 3 in the morning too, because that's where he gets all of his work, is from that particular property manager. So he'll come out at 3 in the morning and take care of your problem. But that property manager will also take care of things like paying the property taxes every January. So for instance, your property tax statement will come out every January of every year. If you pay it in January, you get a 15% discount. If you pay it in February, you get only a 10% discount. And then if you pay it later than February, it's a full 100% of the property tax amount that's due. But your property manager can manage that for you if you kind of forget it. You know, they automatically go online and look it up online, excuse me, in January, and let you know what your property taxes are, and they can pay it out of the fund that you've set up with them. Maintenance can kind of be the same way. The property manager, a lot of people will set up either a co-signature bank account in one of the banks down here, or they'll just deposit funds into the property manager's account. You know, maybe like $1,000 or some nominal amount like that. And the property manager can then use that for any kind of maintenance work that needs to be done, perhaps paying the staff. If you like the property manager to pay the maid and the gardener directly, the property manager can do that. And then maybe when that account gets down to maybe $200, they'll contact the owner and just say, okay, it's time to, you know, re-up your balance. You know, you need to put another $800 in there. So they'll take care of all that. If you happen to buy a property that's in an association, like an HOA association, they can take care of those HOA fees as well. So they can pay that monthly HOA fee, or for instance, I live in an HOA association and we pay it once a year. But, you know, that's something that either the owner can to pay directly, or again, your property manager can pay that directly. So a good thing to have is a property manager for, you know, those types of fees. They can manage all that for you.
Yeah, and I'm sure at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, we can refer clients to property managers like that are trustworthy, so that should be covered as well. Now, Greg, could you highlight some potential challenges or pitfalls that buyers should be aware of when buying property in Mexico?
Sure. Here's an interesting thing about purchasing property in Mexico. This notarial that we've talked about is the one that manages the closing process, and the buyer is the one that gets to choose the notarial. Legally, by Mexican law, the buyer is the one that chooses the notarial. The slight challenge is that the notarial also does the capital gains tax calculations for the seller. So obviously the seller is keenly interested in knowing what his property or what his capital gains tax debt will be when he closes. So it's very important that both the buyer and the seller agree on who that notario is going to be at the closing, because the buyer gets to choose it, but the seller has a vested interest in knowing who that is, because, you know, they want to make sure that their capital gains tax is as low as possible. So make sure that that's a negotiating point when you're making the offer, is, you know, what notarial will be used, and also what legal team. The notarial that I work with, for instance, has 5 different legal teams, and different realtors work with different legal teams, even though they're working with the same notarial. So those are kind of, you know, the kinds of things to make sure that you're negotiating and being aware of up front, because I've experienced deals in my 12 years here where the seller suddenly says, oh no, I thought my capital gains tax were going to be 0, and now you're telling me that it's $800. So, you know, you want to make sure that that has been negotiated and taken care of up front before you get dual signatures on an offer. You know, again, it's good to make sure that you get that no lien certification from the notarial right after you go under contract, because remember, you don't put any money down for 10 days. So if for some reason you had dual signatures on an offer and then your realtor working with the notarial asked for the no lien certificate and the notarial said, oh no, there's a lien against it, and the seller never disclosed that, you haven't put any money into escrow yet. So you'll be able to say, hey, Mr. Seller, there's some sort of a lien here from a vendor, some worker that did work on your home 2 years ago, for instance, just as an example. You need to pay that off first before I put any money into escrow. So again, working with an experienced licensed realtor who works with, again, a good notarial that will be checking all those sorts of things, those will come to light very quickly in the process before any money has been put into escrow.
Of course, yes. And why don't you share with us some tips on how to avoid or overcome these challenges?
It's funny, we sort of did address that. I mean, again, it's working with a very experienced realtor and working with a very good notario who will double check those things. It's also important to work with a notarial that has a good reputation. There are notarials. The notarial, let me address this. This is another point that's really important. Notarial collects that 4% acquisition tax. And that's something that he has to collect and put into a separate account because it gets paid directly to the federal government. And just like in the United States, they cannot commingle funds. Sometimes in the United States, you'll have what's called a transfer tax. Here in Mexico and San Miguel in particular, it's called an acquisition tax. There are notarios, certain ones in town that have a reputation for not paying that acquisition tax. And so it's very important that you and your realtor choose a notarial. Your realtor obviously is going to guide you to choose a notarial and a legal team that has a good reputation and has not faced those kinds of legal problems in the past. So again, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I'm stressing how critical it is that you pick a very well-known and respected realtor with lots of good experience, who in turn then works with a notarial that they have a great reputation. And obviously one of the best ways to do that is to pick a brand that is very recognizable, because you know that they've been vetted. And in this particular case, Berkshire Hathaway Home Services is an American franchise. We've all been vetted by Warren Buffett's senior team. So they all make sure that we're working with the best and most respected notarials in town. That's a really important key. All the other real estate companies here are just master franchises, but we're an American franchise. Even though I'm based in Mexico, we're an American franchise, and Warren Buffett's senior people have vetted us. So you know that you're working with a realtor that has a good reputation and a good relationship with the best notario in town.
Of course, choosing wisely your team when purchasing a home is crucial to having just a smooth process, right? So thank you, Greg. It's been a very, very thorough conversation. I mean, we talked about Mexican law and the role of a notary public, the purchase agreement, the concept of due diligence as well, which is important. The closing the deal, which is the heart of it all, and what happens before and after purchasing a home in San Miguel de Allende. So thank you so much, Greg, for all this information. Basically, what we advise is to work with a licensed realtor with years of experience and a trustworthy company. So seek a brand you know, and that's basically it. We encourage our viewers as well to contact Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Colonial Homes San Miguel just for more information or to start their property search, right?
Exactly, team. Stay with us for about 60 more seconds, or you'll see our contact information at the end of the video. You'll have an email, you'll have the website, you'll have a toll-free number that you can call. So please feel free to reach out and let us know if you have any other questions. We've covered lots of topics today. I mean, lots of information today and a broad topic. So it might be a lot to absorb, but feel free to reach out. We're happy to walk you through it in person, either on a phone call or a Zoom if you'd like. And we'll look forward to sharing more information with you again next week. Thanks, Maya. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Greg. See you soon. And well, if you like the video, please hit the like button and share maybe with someone who might find this information helpful. And subscribe to our channel for more real estate related content. We release videos like this on a weekly basis. Thank you so much, Greg. It's been a great conversation. Take care.
Bye-bye, Maya.
See you
Bye,
soon.
viewers.